Hello. Today I'll be showing you how I thumbnail and how I sort of transition that into making an illustration like this one. I think thumbnailing is pretty important, especially when you're trying to do more intentional pieces. So I hope this helps someone out there. Thumbnailing is basically when you do a small mock-up of a bigger piece that you plan to create, where you plan out what the artwork is gonna look like. So this means changing up the composition, the values, or the colors, but on a smaller and more compact scale, so you can get a feel for the actual illustration when you actually make it. You can do this in the drawing app that you usually use, or alternatively in your sketchbook. I know a few artists that choose the latter, and I'll also be showing you what I mean by that with my own thumbnails. The most important thing to keep in mind is to keep things simple and clear. It's just a thumbnail, just a small sketch, realistically, of what your final thing might end up looking like. So if, say, you do a thumbnail and let it sit for a couple days, you still understand what you're trying to convey in the drawing through that alone. The details come later when you're actually working on it, so you don't have to stress about the finer things that you want to include. A piece usually changes as you make it anyway, so your thumbnail doesn't have to be perfect. And there's no rule saying that you need to be strict with sticking to your initial ideas or your initial thumbnails. You don't always have to stick to their exact composition, their colors. You can always change things as you make the actual illustration. For me, I usually have an idea ready or I look for inspiration. So in this case, I sort of put down some base ideas first, and I wanted to create an illustration for one of my OCs. And I was juggling between which one and doing mini mock-ups for them, which might have gotten a bit carried away. But I usually like to do rough sketches that I also color in. So in this case, while I was thumbnailing, I used Arrtx's 60 color set that they kindly sent me, and you'll see a little bit more of that as well. But basically, after I settled on a concept that I wanted to expand, I hopped over to Pinterest to gather some more inspiration and some references, because there will be some things that I'm not 100% confident in drawing as well. Usually I just search up sort of the feel for the piece that I'm going for, like, oh, I wanted something sunny, I wanted something in a field. And then I sort of go from there and try and branch off from each reference, from this one to the next, and so on and so forth. And then I save them to a board or to multiple different boards, depending on what it is. And then I use them as a sort of inspiration for what I want to get down on the paper. So in terms of this character, this is Arrtx, and I still haven't got like a fully solid reference sheet for him. And I haven't decided his concrete design, but I do know what kind of silhouette I want to give him. So the references that I'm looking for are targeted at making that very clear. I want to be able to communicate his outfit concisely through the thumbnail as well, without making it look too messy, I suppose. And with that, let's continue to actually making the thumbnail. When making a thumbnail, I try and consciously stick to just big shapes. There are some thumbnails that I've done a little earlier, as you can see in here as well, but those ideas didn't really click, even though, I mean, I think I overdeveloped some of them, but just for the fun of it, just to try out the markers as well and just to see how to use them, basically. I'll also say that I wanted to practice a little more because it's a little bit difficult for me to be conscious of values in a more traditional medium. So to help that, I also made a little swatch earlier of the markers and try and get a feel for what I would be dealing with on the paper. So with my illustration idea, I definitely went through a few iterations. I started off with sort of Arrtx standing with a field behind him, looking at the camera and whatever, which is not an uncommon composition, but I wanted something like that. And I feel like I did overdevelop it a little bit because I wasn't sure what to do, so I just kept going on with the markers. Honestly, I'm not sure what happened. I just ended up layering colors over colors and trying sort of different shadow shapes and adding more and more things. And I do think the end result came out pretty muddy with this one, but it's fine since, well, it is a thumbnail and I can change things later on in my drawing if I want to. I did go on to make a few more iterations because I had another idea for the kind of drawing that I wanted to do. And I tried to be a little more precise and intentional with the direction that I was going in. For this kind of work, I do recommend using acrylic markers like these just because they're easier to just pull out and put on the paper. You don't have to sort of prep anything. like with paints. And they give off a similar effect to painting. They are acrylic markers, but obviously they won't be the same. They're also pretty good at layering, so if you know how to use them, I think they could be quite powerful in the right hands. I've reviewed Arrtx markers before. I do like using them for sketchbook work, like I've said before, just because they're quite easy, they're quite vibrant, and they sort of just do the job without much hassle, and the end results, if you know how to use them, can end up being really, really good. That being said, I'm not the most well-versed in using markers either, but I did enjoy using them for thumbnailing this illustration. I will say that I do wish they had a little more range. I think if you're going to use markers for thumbnailing or for putting stuff in your sketchbook, please be very wary of the range of colors that you select, because this set in particular has a lot of midtones and a lot of light tones, but not a lot of darker values, which did end up being a problem for me later down the line. Like I said, your thumbnails don't have to be totally color accurate, but it does definitely help to have your values sorted out beforehand, which might be a little bit harder to do when you're doing this in a sketchbook just because of the traditional medium, depending on which one you use. So it's good to have both the option of doing it in your drawing app and doing it in your sketchbook if you want to as well. And like I said, I did a few more iterations, and once I've settled on one that I'm happy with, I basically just go with that. Again, these don't have to be perfect. I'm basically just brainstorming ideas and putting them down on the paper. I take whichever one speaks to me the most and then go straight on to the illustration. So I started off quite simple. I just wanted to block out my colors first and get a feel in the sketch of how I'm going to place things and what gradients I want to use, and roughly, the colors I want to use. I already did the thumbnail, so I already know what sort of position I want him to be in, but I did change that a little bit, at least initially anyway. I thought I'd start with sort of the hardest part of the illustration, which for me was the brick wall, just because I don't draw brick walls, so I was there for a while trying to figure it out using my flat brush and using my little reference to help me out there. I also wanted to put some moss on the brick wall just to give it a more natural feel to it rather than leaving it blank. Moss and other little green plants and, foliage, I suppose. Not long after that, I went into basically just lining it because I considered sort of rendering with the flat colors already, but I figured that wouldn't work out just because I'm more of a person that thinks in lines rather than in shapes. So I went ahead and started doing his face. Since I already blocked out the colors that I wanted, I was basically just outlining those, to be honest. So it wasn't that difficult for me. I was also trying to figure out what kind of poncho I wanted him to wear, and I sort of played around with the shapes. I knew I wanted him to have a turtleneck, but, with the shape of the rest of the poncho, I was just messing around until I found something that I liked, which was this lovely little V shape, which sort of exposes part of the sweater. And then I proceeded to struggle for 10 years on drawing his hands because I cannot for the life of me. And then I sort of just gave up and just went to different areas of the piece so I would come back later. And usually that happens with me a couple times, really. If there's something that I can't draw, I'll think, okay, I'll come back to this later, and then I do tackle it later. And usually it does end up working out. If you find that you're drawing something and it's just not drawing, it's just not going, then it's fine to sort of take a break from that and work on a different element of the piece. Work on what you're more comfortable with first, and then do the hard stuff, or vice versa, I suppose. I don't know. Whatever works for you. Your drawing process doesn't have to be the same every time either. Like, I don't usually paint, or I don't usually create illustrations like this, but this time I wanted to try something different and sort of just went with the flow with whatever sort of felt right in the moment, rather than trying to section it out and do it coherently. Which is why I end up with so many layers, to be honest. Well, less so than I would have expected in this piece, to be honest, but I tend to end up with quite a few, just because I'm messing around a lot and thinking, yeah, maybe I should put this on this layer, or I should put this rendering on that layer, and it sort of just... it gets a bit messy. After the lining, I basically went straight into rendering the hair. I had honestly no idea what I was doing. I was just putting down brush strokes and hoping it looked good and hoping that it worked. And I think it didn't turn out that bad, but I was struggling. Something I've definitely noticed is the more I've sort of let go and be more free, I suppose, with my drawings, the easier it's been for me. Or at the very least, I enjoy it more. when I'm trying to stick to sort of a strict structure when I'm making whatever I'm making, it feels like it's sort of restricting me or weighing me down a bit, even if it does work. So I do appreciate making illustrations where it's a lot more free. And I think you should as well. The thumbnailing part of this illustration definitely helped because, you know, it made me consider what did I actually want to convey? What did I actually want to show in this illustration? So when I did get to it, it's like, oh, I already have that idea and I've already mapped it out. So when I do make the real thing, it's not as difficult. I don't have to think too hard about what I'm putting down on the canvas. But like I said, your illustration can change as you make it. So you don't even have to stick to your initial idea if you don't want to. I just decided to. Well, it wasn't my initial idea, but you know, it was an idea of a thumbnail and I decided to go with it. I guess that's the point of it, right? I think the best advice that I've sort of internalized from watching other people draw and drawing myself is that everyone else also doesn't really know what they're doing. Not really. They sort of just go with it and they make it work somehow. So I try to really incorporate that into here. It's sort of like a trust the process, but in a different font, I suppose. Just add things, change things, do things this way or that, and then figure out what looks good to you and commit to it. I was considering a couple of different things to add for this piece, but I decided to keep it simple. I just wanted the main focus to be Arrtx and him being happy, and obviously him sort of sitting underneath the leaves when it's a bright sunny day out. Arrtx is a character that is part of my main cast for my OC world that I still need to develop more, and like I said, I haven't given him a proper character sheet, but he'll probably get one a little bit after this one, just because he deserves it so much. And he's the type of character that's very sweet, very warm-hearted, very loving. I'd say he's more of the innocent archetype, but not completely naive. I just wanted him to sort of represent soft and joyous parts of myself, to be honest. I mean, I didn't create him with that in mind consciously, but that's sort of what he ended up being like. I very much enjoy the idea of people's characters sort of representing parts of themselves. I mean, they all do, but some more consciously than others, right? Some people realize this and they think, oh yes, this character is sort of, you know, sort of representing a part of myself that I'm either very big on showing or exists but isn't always present. Unfortunately, Arrtx is a character where I do want to give him a bit of a tragic story as my little narration goes on, I suppose. Even though he's a very sweet person, he will suffer in my story. He will suffer and he will learn from it, and he will have an ending. It's sort of strange because I sort of have like bits and pieces of the story in my mind, and I've written them down as well, but I haven't strung them together along coherently, if you get what I mean. And I don't know how often people do this as well, but like I have scenes that play in my mind or moments that I want him to have with other characters, with other creatures, with other points in the story, but I haven't, you know, put it all together yet properly, which is something that I will do. Honestly, I was considering putting out more story-focused content for my characters as videos and sort of going into them a little more, making sheets for them and everything, and I think that is something that I'd love to get into. I'd love to talk about. I'd love to develop more because these characters, they all deserve so much more love, but I haven't given them much. And honestly, it's like, it makes me feel distraught because they deserve so much. They deserve to have a story, a complete and full one, rather than sitting in my sketchbook or sitting in my drawings and just being there. I think that's something that a lot of artists run into as well. They have so many ideas, but they never really follow through with them just because, you know, life, things happen, or we have different projects, all of that kind of stuff. But anyway, this is the finished illustration as you've seen, and I hope this was helpful for someone at least. I know I'm sort of jumping around different video topics and ideas and whatever, but honestly, I want this channel to be something where I can just put out the content that I wish to put out without much pressure to stick to a specific niche. I mean, I suppose I'm already niched enough. I'm on art YouTube. But yeah, I hope this was helpful. If any of you want to see anything else from me, anything guide related, please let me know and I will consider it, and I might even make a video about it as well. I do have a couple of ideas for videos this month, and this video has been a little bit, well, quite a little bit late because I've had exams and I just haven't had the time to properly focus and work on my YouTube and all my art stuff, so I need to get back onto it. Anyways, thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye bye!